Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. Tonight I'm joined by Advocate Firoz Boda of Cage Africa, and he's going to be discussing and unpacking the very important question of Islamophobia. Now, for some that might be a term that is well known, for others it might be something that is very new. But the background to the topic Islamophobia has been recently in the news again, more particularly with the attacks that we've seen in Gaza in the last 2 weeks. You could take any other place, you can take Kashmir, you can take Afghanistan. It was a little known fact that in Afghanistan, over 100 Hafiz al-Quran were killed when the madrasa was bombed. In Palestine, protesters were shot down, and in the last week we've seen the use of some very strange chemicals. Some say it's a new kind of bomb. But basically, from 1996 to 2010, there are reports that the US interventions and aggressions in various countries has accounted for about 4 million Muslims being killed. Again, recently on the 3rd of April in the UK, there were pamphlets calling upon British to celebrate, punish a Muslim day. Indeed, we've seen a few attacks, some acid attacks, etc., on people in the UK. Now, an expert in this area and somebody who has appeared on the show before is Advocate Firoz Boda. Firoz, assalamu alaikum. And thanks for joining us. Just for the audience information, Firoz joining us via Skype. He's not in the studio tonight, and we hope that we don't have too many technical problems. Firoz, just the word Islamophobia, how and when was this coined?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I don't personally like the word because it's a bit of an oxymoron. If you put Islam, which is some translate as submission, others translate as peace, and you put phobia, the thing doesn't make sense. But it's a word that's been coined in recent times, and it's defined differently by different people. So some define Islamophobia as the unfounded fear of Islam or Muslims leading to violence or discrimination against Muslims, both individually and structurally. And structurally, what it means is that it creates an aggressive anti-Muslim narrative that is based on assumptions which subvert the political expression or identity of a Muslim individual by turning them into potential threats. Others define Islamophobia as a form of structural racism. Now, this is partly true, and the argument goes like this. Islamophobia is structural racism informed by white supremacist ideology, or when perpetrated by non-whites, it is done because they have been colonized and are implementing a colonized mindset. So the argument goes that black and brown people can only excel if they follow the values of the white person. And through colonialism, black and brown people were taught to think as white people. Hence, even when they are Islamophobic, its cause remains racism. Islamophobia, for example, would result in a person who looks like a Muslim, like a Sikh person, being targeted because of the perception that person is a Muslim because of the way that person dresses. So Islam has been racialized. And some in the West look at Muslims as, on the basis of race, either Arabs or blacks or Indians or Middle Eastern. And therefore some say Islamophobia is a form of structural racism. And I think that's partly true, particularly in Western dominated societies. But you have Islamophobia practiced even in so-called Islamic societies by so-called Islamic governments. And you have Islamophobia practiced in China, and you have Islamophobia practiced in Africa. So I don't think that there is a complete explanation for Islamophobia, but viewed as structural racism is certainly true when applied to countries which have been colonized. CAGE, the organization that I come from, defines Islamophobia as a structural form of oppression driven by securitization, the state policies and laws driven by securitization narrative. And the argument is that Islam causes violence. The more Islamic a person is, the more prone to violence they are, and therefore all Muslims are potential terrorists. So that's the secular definition of Islamophobia. There is a beautiful characterization of what Islamophobia entails in the Quran, chapter 40, Surah Ghafir, verse 26, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وقال فرعون ذروني أقتل موسى وليدعو ربه إني أخاف أن يبدل دينكم أو أن يظهر في الأرض الفساد. And the translation is, said the Pharaoh, leave me to slay Moses and let him call on his Lord. What I fear is lest he should change your religion or lest he should cause mischief to appear in the land. And then Musa alayhi salam's response to that is, وقال موسى إني أخت بربي وربكم من كل متكبر لا يؤمن بيوم الحساب. Musa alayhi salam said, I have indeed called upon my Lord and your Lord for protection from every arrogant one who believes not in the day of account. Now, if you look at the first verse, it provides two criteria. One is Fir'aun saying, what I fear is lest he should change your religion. Now, and the second part is, lest he should cause mischief to appear in the land. So if very recently in Birmingham, the erstwhile president of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, gave a speech, and he called the fight against Islamic extremism as the struggle of our generation. And what is very interesting is that he echoed the words and arguments of Fir'aun many, many centuries before. And he said something like this: what we are fighting in Islamic extremism is an ideology, it's an extreme doctrine. And like any extreme doctrine, it's subversive. And its furthest end, it seeks to destroy nation states to invent its own barbaric realm. And it often backs violence to achieve this aim, mostly violence against fellow Muslims who don't subscribe to its sick worldview. But you don't have to support violence to subscribe to certain intolerant ideas which create a climate in which extremists can flourish. Ideas which are hostile to basic liberal values such as democracy, freedom, and sexual equality. Ideas which actively promote discrimination, sectarianism, and segregation. Now you'll see that quotation from David Cameron, that he uses almost in modern language the same argument that the Fir'aun used many centuries ago when the Fir'aun said, what I fear is lest he should change your religion. And David Cameron is saying, well, I fear that Muslims are going to change the values of secular liberalism. Or Fir'aun said, lest he should cause mischief to appear in the land. And what David Cameron is saying is that he believes that there's a part of Islamic ideology which make Muslims prone to violence and therefore create a terrorism threat. So it's very, very interesting how the Quranic verses tie up the two pillars of so-called Islamophobia. But then if one looks at the response of Musa alayhi salam, he says, I have indeed called upon my Lord and your Lord for protection from every arrogant one. So he describes the Fir'aun as a mutakabbir, an arrogant person who does not believe in Judgment Day. And I think that is the proper foundation for Islamophobia. The foundation for Islamophobia is not really fear, it is disbelief. And the fear is just an argument mastered to victimize those who follow the religion of Allah. So I think that the description of Musa alayhi salam is a more accurate description of what Islamophobia really entails. And really a person who is Islamophobic is really what Musa alayhi salam called a mutakabbir, an arrogant person who is a disbeliever. And I think that is much broader than structural racism, because a person could be non-racist but still be, in a sense, Islamophobic. You can have people from all races who are Islamophobic. So I think that racism does play an element, certainly in Western societies, but it is not a complete explanation of the cause of Islamophobia. And the complete explanation is in the verses of the Quran that I quoted, I think.
Oh, there's an interesting background. Thank you very much, Feroz. Because when I was researching this, there were suggestions that the term came around in the late 20th century. And it's now regarded as a neologistical term. But from what you're saying to me, it is as ancient as history itself. But time for a short break. Please stay tuned and join us after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A reminder that you are tuned to Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. And tonight I'm joined by Advocate Feroz Bouda of Cage Africa. And we're trying to understand the topic of Islamophobia. As Feroz has indicated in the first half, it really has its roots a very, very long time ago, and he's given the example of Sayyidina Musa's interaction with Fir'aun. But Feroz, just interestingly, you pointed out that in the ayah it says that I've indeed called upon my Lord and your Lord. So there he's actually stamped the authority that the Lord of Pharaoh was also Allah, because Pharaoh himself had rejected that. But with regard to implementation of Islamophobia, how is it normally implemented?
So Islamophobia is implemented through a hot and a cold war, and a divide and rule strategy. A good Muslim, bad Muslim narrative, and a good Muslim country, bad Muslim country narrative. So if I can just break that down, those Muslim countries or governments which support Western ideology, for example, Egypt, when they perpetrate acts of violence, the West don't condemn them and don't call them terrorists. But when those who oppose, for example, the occupation of Muslim lands like in Afghanistan and Iraq perpetrate violence, then those countries or those people perpetrating violence are bad Muslims. And so what the West does is create a divide and rule strategy, divide Muslims between good Muslims as it perceives and bad Muslims as it perceives. And then it enforces the entire Islamophobic agenda in two ways. In a hot way by wars and invasions of Muslim lands, by capturing and kidnapping Muslim prisoners, by taking them to places like Guantanamo Bay and detaining them. Yeah, there are currently still about 38 Muslim brothers who are in Guantanamo Bay. At its genesis, had about 800 Muslim people who were literally kidnapped from the hills of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other areas and flown to Guantanamo Bay. So the hot part of the implementation in terms of the hot war is through invasion, kidnapping, imprisonment, detention. And then it's also implemented in a Cold War sense. And in the Cold War sense, that is implemented through terrorist legislation by creating definitions of terrorism which really fulfill a Western agenda or narrative. And then by also creating more what the West perceives as softer laws, but they're really not soft, laws which, if a person is suspected of being an Islamic extremist or a terrorist, that person can be deprived of citizenship. That person's children can be taken away if that person is perceived to be a threat to the state. That person, for example, could also be subjected to control orders. So those are more cold strategies, strategies in terms of implementation through legislation. And it travels between the legal and illegal. So, for example, the wars that the West launches, it would argue it's legal, but most international scholars will say any war that is launched, say in the case of an imminent threat, would require a UN resolution, and the West doesn't have any UN resolutions for the invasion of all the countries that he's invading currently. And even the kidnapping of Muslim prisoners and taking them to Guantanamo Bay, that is clearly outside the rule of law, and that is illegal. But the Cold War is also sometimes implemented through actual legislation, like terrorist legislation, and more what is called preventative legislation or softer legislation, which on the face of it seems, generous, but is really sometimes even more intrusive into a person's life. And you can take some examples as we go along.
Now, just a reminder to our viewers, the lines are open and you're welcome to call in and join the conversation, make a contribution, or even ask a question. Feroz, an example in history, you've already given us the example of the Pharaoh, but India has an interesting history as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, if you look at all colonial lands, but let's look at specifically the Indian occupation of Britain. Now, many of the ulama of India had allegiances to the Ottoman Empire. And while they were loyal to their country, they also were loyal to the Caliphate in Turkey. And so many of the ulama, if you trace, for example, the history of the formation of the Deoband school. The Deoband school was actually a school formed to create fighters who were resisting the British occupation of India. So what the British would do is they would rally good ulama who they felt were good, to pass fatwas against the Ottoman Empire to justify the occupation in Britain's colonialism policy. Now, if you look at some of the founders of the Deoband school, Maulana Mahmud Hassan refused to sign these UK-inspired fatwas and rejected them. And in order to support its ally in Mecca, the British paid certain scholars to issue a fatwa blending the Ottoman Empire no longer Muslim, a fatwa of Kufr. So some of the founders of the Deoband school, Sheikh ul-Hind and Maulana Madani, may Allah be pleased with them, both refused to endorse this fatwa as it was against the Sharia. And that resulted in a warrant being issued for their arrest. And when they were placed in concentration camps in Malta because they refused to sign this fatwa. They were imprisoned for legal verdicts and opinions, for thought crimes, for their ideology, because they were branded as bad Muslims who were not loyal to the British state. And they were first interrogated, detained in narrow, dark prison cells, subjected to torturous conditions. They were placed in concentration camps because they refused to sign fatwas. They were imprisoned for their ideology. And you see the same pattern that is perpetrated in our times, where if the United States forces people to subscribe to their version of Islam, and when people give fatwas that it is, for example, legitimate, especially in places where the United States is invaded and occupied. Now, even in international law, armed struggle is quite legal against an occupier. But those who pass fatwas that it is permissible for people in Muslim countries who are subject to occupation to fight are then taken to places like Guantanamo Bay or imprisoned in U.S. jails because they are branded as being terrorists. So the history shows that the practice of Islamophobia has been here and will always be here. And if I can take the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll see the strategies are the same. When the Prophet ﷺ started spreading Islam, the disbelievers of Mecca feared the same thing the Pharaoh feared. The Pharaoh feared that Musa ﷺ will change his religion, and that is what the inhabitants and controllers of Mecca feared. They feared that the religion, which was idol worshipping, or it was a secular society at that time, where they tolerated all different forms of worship, would be overthrown by the Prophet ﷺ. So what did they do to the Prophet ﷺ? Everything they do today, they did to the Prophet ﷺ. They first tried to bribe the Prophet ﷺ. That didn't work. They then started torturing the Prophet ﷺ's followers. We know the story of Hazrat Bilal. We know that the first martyr of Islam was Sumayya radiallahu anha, followed by her husband. So torture was a method used in the Prophet ﷺ's time. When the torture didn't work, they started labeling the Prophet ﷺ. They started calling him soothsayer, magician, and all of these insults they held against him in the same way where they use terminology against Muslims who fight and resist occupation today. They call you a terrorist, which is the insult of the day. When that didn't work, they implemented economic sanctions against the Prophet ﷺ and the Banu Hashim. And that is the same pattern where the West will implement economic sanctions against individuals who they place on a terrorist list. They can't even have bank accounts. And at a collective level, if you're a country with the West brand the terrorist, then they impose economic sanctions against you. Now, when all of that didn't work, they put the Prophet ﷺ on a kill list, like they do with so-called terrorists today. They put them on an assassination list, and they try and assassinate you. And when that didn't work, they exiled the Muslims, which is what happens now. And when that didn't work, they declared war on Muslims. And so you have the collective Islamophobia that was practiced in the time of Prophet ﷺ by the government authorities of Mecca being the same. But even at an individual level, you see Islamophobia being practiced by individuals at street level. So you find, for example, that Muslim women who wear hijab are attacked. And now there was a situation that happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Banu Nadir of Medina pulled the hijab of one of the Sahabi out. And that is what caused the expulsion from Medina. And you have the same type of Islamophobia practice, like in modern times you have people throwing pig's head in the masjid. Now the Prophet ﷺ was subjected to very similar treatment. You'll recall that they threw intestines on him, and they would dump the dirt in his yard. And there was a time when he and Hazrat Abu Bakr were worshipping in the Kaaba, and they were just assaulted randomly by people on the street. So every pattern of hot and cold war type Islamophobia that exists now was there implemented in the time of Prophet ﷺ. So those are examples in history of the practice of Islamophobia.
Okay, thank you for that, Feroz. It's time for the short break. Please stay tuned and then join us after the break, and you can join us with your calls as well. Thank you. I see that guy had to step down from Imperial.
Huh?
The guy from Imperial, Mark Lamberti.
Yeah.
I read the judgment, quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it went overboard.
Yeah, I think they were not going to give him, because I think Nazir's arguments were quite sound, eh?
Yeah, I bring the judgment as a truth of the backbiter.
Yeah, it's amazing, eh? Now, I mean, with equity and all of that, the judgments can go in any way, man.
Yeah, anyway.
Especially at the Concord, there is a different kettle of fish, man.
Yeah,
It's unpredictable in a way, because look, if the judge feels that there's human rights and things in issue here, or he has a particular feeling about something, he can go in that direction. Eh?
Yeah. It's uncertain.
How many seconds? How many minutes? 1 minute, 30 seconds. Feroz, aren't you eligible for Silk now?
I took some 3 years ago.
Oh, so why didn't they put SC? You should have told me.
No, man.
Why not? It's to give people hope, man. They can see highly qualified, committed individuals. That's what you need.
Let them put their trust in your law. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm asking to not if you're out of the English language. But 2014.
Oh, that's a long time, man. I didn't know. So how many, but now Legal Practices Act is coming in. It'll make a lot of changes, I think. Eh?
Yeah, it will, yeah. I don't know next year. But I'm impressed. Yeah, I don't know how.
20 seconds. No, you must stay as counsel and you will get your briefs. I mean, you're not going to descend into the arena. 10 seconds, Firoz.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the second half of Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. Tonight I'm joined by Advocate Firoz Boda, SC, who is representing Cage Africa, and the topic of discussion is Islamophobia, a very interesting topic indeed. Firoz, in terms of the modern times, now, we've done a historical background, very, very informative. You've been able to sketch this from Sayyidina Musa right down to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and very aptly described that every challenge that we face today is something that he had faced and he had dealt with it. In terms of the modern examples done through the use of legal and illegal means, how is Islamophobia rolled out?
So let's look at it at the collective level, at the government level. So you have, as I indicated, the invasion of Muslim lands, you have the invasion of Afghanistan, you have the invasion of Iraq, you have destabilization caused in the Middle East, you have the invasion of Palestinian lands by the Israeli government. In the African continent, the U.S. has been having an undeclared war for the last many, many years. And on average, every single day on the African continent, there are at least on average 10 U.S. Special Force missions on the African continent. Either training programs, assassinations through drones, or special force attacks where they target certain people. So you have the hot war being practiced. You have still the concentration camp called Guantanamo Bay open, and Donald Trump has openly said that he's going to keep it open and he's going to load it with more bad guys, which by his definition means Muslims. America has a long terrorist list, and on that terrorist list, even ex-President Mandela found himself on that very same terrorist list. But the irony is that in Guantanamo Bay, the only so-called terrorist you find is a Muslim, nobody else. So Guantanamo Bay was a concentration camp exclusively for Muslims. And then at an individual level where Islamophobia is practiced on the street, you have the example of people throwing pigs' heads in masjid. You have the example of the attack of mostly Muslim women. And most of these people who at street level are very, very coward. Because what they do is they will attack the sisters. And you see it on videos. You see, I saw a recent video where a sister, just because she had a hijab, was punched in the face. I saw another video where a sister was almost pushed into a train. She was standing on the edge of the of the pavement waiting for a train. And just as the train was coming, she was pushed, and luckily she survived. And you have even sisters who have been raped and murdered because they wear the hijab. You have the hurling of verbal abuse against Muslim men and women because of their identity. Muslim men will wear beards, Muslim women will wear hijab. You have abuse on social media. You have people branding Muslims a terrorist. You have, for example, recently in UK, somebody advertised punish a Muslim day, and you'll get points for punishing a Muslim. You have attacks in the African continent, for example, in the Central African Republic, bodies of Muslim people were burnt and they were eaten. You have attacks in Gujarat, in India. You have attacks in Europe and Africa. So at the collective level and individual level, you see Islamophobia practiced in the same way it was practiced in the time of the Prophet. Then you have bias in media reports, attacking Islam as opposed to individualizing a grievance. So you'll see, for example, where acts of political violence are committed by white supremacists, then the crime is individualized. There's an attempt to understand what was the person's problem. Did the person have a mental problem? There isn't no attempt to blame the entire religion for it and to put every Muslim on trial. A recent report says that when Muslims commit acts of political violence, it is reported in the media 6 times more than when white supremacists, for example, commit acts of political violence. If you look at the last few years, despite the fact that the media funds and shows acts of political violence committed by Muslims, the truth is that most acts at street level of political violence are committed outside the House of Islam by white supremacists, by other individuals. And then you have it also practiced through law, through terrorism law, through removing citizenship from Muslims, from profiling Muslims at airports in the name of state security, infiltrating masjids, using intelligence. You have it in some countries in Europe where they ban the wearing of hijab or the building of minarets. You find Islamophobia or remnants of it in immigration control, in discrimination in employment, in CVE policies, in banking rules. For example, people's accounts are taken away from them. You have infiltration and investigation of Muslim charities and madrasas more so than you would have in other schools. And you have CVE policies. I give you one example. Our international director of CASE, Mohammed Rabbani, was recently put on trial in the UK. And his alleged crime was this. CASE was investigating a case of a brother who was tortured by the United States administration. And there was an attempt to investigate the perpetrators of that torture. Now, Rabbani was one of the persons working on this case. He's not a lawyer, but he was part of the consultation team and the effort of the lawyers to try and gather evidence. So he was very much integrally involved in collection of evidence. He had interviewed this brother, and then he had returned to UK, and he was stopped in the UK airport under what is called Schedule 7. Now there, if you are stopped at UK by law, you have to cooperate. And he was asked for his laptop and cell phone, which he handed over, and then he was asked for his password. And he said, no, I'm not going to give you the password, because on my computer, on my cell phone, there is the confidential information of a torture survivor, and we as CAGE are working on a case to further this person's claim against his torturer, and the information is confidential. And they prosecuted him in the United Kingdom courts for terrorism. And he was effectively given a suspended sentence, but he was found guilty of terrorism for refusing to hand over the password to his laptop and computer on the basis that he was protecting the confidentiality of a client. And the magistrate accepted his reason, but said, well, under UK law, this is strict liability. You were terrorist. And most of the people stopped in Schedule 7 searches are Muslims. If you look at the statistics, you'll find that there's great amount of profiling of Muslims at airport internationally. So these are the type of Islamophobic practices at a collective level and at a street level. But I go back to what I started off by saying, that what ultimately causes this, sometimes yes, it's caused or informed by racism or by white supremacist ideology or by superiority complex. But you can have Islamophobia or acts of Islamophobia being committed by people who are not inherently racist. And the core of it is this belief, a fear, irrational fear of the truth, and an attempt to, promote an ideology which is inconsistent with the law of Allah. And that is really what its root cause is, I think.
It's interesting that you say that, because on the other hand, one sees a great affection for certain sports stars. I'm thinking about Muhammad Ali. One can describe him as a brand ambassador, Muhammad Salah. And in fact, our own Hashim Amla, these seem to be people that are acting out their Islam when the playing fields are level, when there isn't any prejudice or bias, although there were some whisperings against Amla by some of the commentators, if you recall. But the point I'm making is, it's very strange on one level that you have a brand ambassador who's absolutely loved by everyone, and his religion, or him being religious, is accepted. On the other hand, it's also very strange to me that the business world will welcome so-called Islamic banking, but reject the messenger who brought the so-called Sharia compliance
Yes.
notion.
It's a very good point.
So it looks to me a little bit of being selective. But I hear what you say, that there's a media campaign that is very, very effective in transmitting fear-mongering against Muslims and ordinary Muslims who have absolutely no intention of getting involved in anything are affected by this. You could be walking in the street, you could be having an ice cream, and you fall victim to a vicious attack. But time for another...
You must just remember, Ashraf, these things happen to the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. So it's no different. And as a Muslim, it is obviously unacceptable that people are attacked just based on their religion. But from a Muslim's perspective, you find solace and strength in your deed. So, when this happens to you, yes, you are a victim of violence, and you're a victim of disbelief, and you're a victim of oppression when this happens to you. But the strength is in knowing that when you stand up for the truth, and it is against the grain of what governments would expect of you, because they don't believe that you're entitled to criticize them or fight against their occupation or their torture, and then then the community suffers this. It's been the lot of the believers from time immemorial, and that is if you go back to the Fir'aun time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in one of the verses calls him the Lord of Stakes, because he used to torture people and tie them on stakes. So the same thing happens to believers, and has always happened to believers in the history of time. And it is, as a Muslim, yes, you are a victim, but you don't always, look at yourself as a victim, because you look at yourself as somebody who suffered for the sake of Allah, knowing that in the Akhirah you will get your reward. And you will get justice on the earth also.
Appropriate place to stop. Please stay tuned. We're going for a short ad break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A reminder that you are tuned to Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. And tonight I'm joined by Advocate Firoz Boda, SC, who is a member of CAGE Africa, and we're trying to understand the concept of Islamophobia. And Advocate Firoz Boda was explaining to us historically its significance and the fact that it goes way back. It has its roots, including the sufferings at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba and the people that came thereafter. We are reminded about how it plays out itself in the modern world with hard wars and soft wars. But Firoz, something very interesting that has occurred in the UK since July 2015, and it goes by the acronym CVE, Countering Violent Extremism. What can you tell us about this?
So in the United Kingdom, there is a program called the PREVENT strategy, which is what is called a Countering Violent Extremism strategy. So the idea here is that because Muslims are seen as inherently violent, the UK authorities have sort of placed a legal obligation on all local UK authorities, prisons, national health service trusts, and the education sector, that is from preschool, high school, universities, to prevent and detect signs of radicalism and extremism. So every person in the UK who works with a child has to, by law, see for certain signs of radicalism or extremism. And if that child has signs of radicalism and extremism, there is a legal duty on that person working with that child, even if it's a medical professional, to report that child to the counter-terrorism police. And you've had cases, for example, where toddlers were referred to the counter-terrorism police for wearing a Palestinian flag, a badge, or somebody was accessing the web for a project on Islamophobia, for example, and looking at some website, and this sounded a bit suspicious. So there would be or doing a research project for university, and they would be called to the counterterrorism police. And what could happen ultimately is that these people who are then referred to the counterterrorism police, if they are then interviewed and it's believed that the child is being exposed to signs of radicalization at home, the UK has the power to take the child away from the parents, and this has happened in certain instances, or to place control orders on the child or the parents, or even to strip the parents of citizenship. Now, if you look at what the criteria is to identify people who may pose signs of radicalization. For example, one of the criteria is a belief in the applicability of Sharia in contemporary times. Most Muslims would want that, but that's a sign of radicalization. The concept of belonging to a single Muslim community, belief in the legitimacy of armed struggle anywhere in the world, including armed resistance by Palestinians against the Israelis, advocating for a caliphate, refusing to condemn the killing of soldiers in Iraq or Afghanistan, belief that homosexuality is a crime and should be punished. And the UK government has apparently based the criteria on a radicalization study which identifies 22 factors of radicalization. And these factors are nonsensical and have no scientific basis whatsoever. And Cage on their website, cage.uk.org, has exposed these 22 factors of radicalization as simply being a farce. But if I read some of them, it could apply to a 6-year-old child or Jamaat al-Tabligh, who we know, for example, is a very passive dawah movement in the House of Islam. But they could easily be branded radicals because they believe in Sharia and the superiority of Sharia. And they have been attacked in the UK media. So some of the criteria is for having signs of radicalization is having a grievance or feeling a sense of injustice, having a sense of identity, meaning, and belonging, excitement, comradeship, or adventure. That could be a sign of radicalization. Dominance and control, political or moral motivation, a family or friends support extremist offending, group influence, mental health problems, them and us thinking, attitudes that justify offending. So these criteria are so broad and inexplicable, lacking any definitional content, that you've had cases where a 6-year-old child was referred to terrorism police for drawing his father holding a cucumber. And when the teacher asked the child, "What is your father holding?" the child couldn't pronounce cucumber, and it sounded like kookaburra. And that child was then referred to the terrorism police. And their parents had to be interviewed, and they subjected to an entire legal process. So CVE, while it appears to be a form of preventing radicalization, it actually has the opposite effect, because you have a case of over-reporting of Muslims, and it's disproportionately applied to Muslim children and Muslim students in the United Kingdom. And this is having a very negative effect and an opposite effect to what it is designed, because it's radicalizing more people.
Unfortunately, Feroz, we've run out of time. And I need you, just in 30 seconds, to give us a closing. After all of this, what is one to do?
Well, I think at the street level, Muslims must not be shy and learn to defend themselves. Because if attacks against Muslims, particularly Muslim Christians, come at all places, in airports, in train stations, Muslim sisters are attacked. We had an incident, remember, in Clarksville a few years ago, where a brother was murdered because of Islamophobia. And then speak truth to power. Monitor government policies to see if they are funding these soft wars against Muslims, which appear to be neutral but are disproportionately applied to Muslims. Document cases of Islamophobic attacks, because as a Muslim, one of your obligations is to stand witness against oppression. So it's important to document these incidences so we have firm evidence of it, and then use whatever means that is within your power to resist this type of thing. From a policy point of view, you can take up cases to and don't feel victimized. Assert your rights and assert your identity. And that is what I think we should do at the very least.
Okay, Feroz, thank you very much for your time. And very interesting topic indeed. Hopefully we can take it further for a deeper discussion in the future. To our viewers, thank you for having joined us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.